I've spent over 4 decades as a doctor. I've seen thousands of patients. I've watched people grow old, some gracefully, some tragically. And after all these years, there's one brutal truth that still haunts me. Most people don't die because their bodies give up. They die because something far more silent, far more dangerous sneaks into their lives, long before death ever comes knocking. I've sat beside countless hospital beds, held trembling hands, and looked into the eyes of people in their 80s and 90s who once lived vibrant, joyful lives but had somehow, almost without noticing, faded. Not because of cancer, not because of heart attacks, not because of strokes. No. They faded long before their organs did. They faded inside. That's what no one tells you about aging after 80. It doesn't happen the way most people think. It's not a sudden fall or a shocking diagnosis that takes most people down. It's something much quieter. It slips through the cracks of daily life. It hides inside your habits, inside your routines, inside your choices so small you don't even realize you're making them. Let me be brutally honest with you, as only an old doctor can be. What kills people after 80 is the slow erosion of their reasons to stay alive. I've seen proud, sharp men who ran businesses well into their 70s suddenly shrink into fragile figures who barely leave their chairs. I've seen women who raised entire families, organized communities, and led active, beautiful lives retreat into silence. No longer calling their friends, no longer tending to their gardens, no longer bothering to open the curtains in the morning. And it all happens so gently that most people, even their own children, don't see it until it's too late. That's what makes it so terrifying. It is not loud, it doesn't scream. It doesn't knock at your door, it simply whispers softly, "Stay in today. Don't bother calling. Don't worry about going out. Just rest a little longer." At first it feels like comfort. Like you're simplifying your life. Like you've earned the right to slow down. But inside your brain, something very different begins to unfold. Neurons begin to disconnect. Hormones start to shift. Muscles weaken not from age, but from disuse. Sleep becomes shallow. The world grows quieter, and the cruelest part? You may not even notice. This is why I've come out of retirement to speak. I've seen too many good people fade unnecessarily, and I can tell you, as a doctor who's watched the human body up close for decades, this decline is not inevitable. In fact, much of it is preventable. But only if you recognize the invisible forces that are pulling you down. Let me ask you something, and I want you to answer this in your heart. Have you ever wondered why some people live strong, clear-headed, full-hearted lives into their late 80s, 90s, even beyond 100, while others begin to crumble shortly after 80? Genetics? Luck? No. That's the story people like to tell because it's easy. But it's not the real reason. The real reason is much darker, and much more under your control than you might think. In this video, I'm going to share with you the 5 hidden enemies that steal life from people after 80. These aren't the usual suspects you've heard 100 times before, like smoking, cholesterol, or diet. No, these enemies are far more subtle. They sneak in during the quiet hours of your days. They come disguised as caution, as convenience, as rest. And they steal from you not all at once, but piece by piece, until one day you wake up and realize you're only a shadow of who you once were. What I'm about to share may disturb you. It may even frighten you. But that's good. Because you need to be a little scared. Fear wakes us up. Fear gives us urgency. And if you're willing to face these uncomfortable truths with me, I can promise you something. You will never look at aging the same way again. You see, I believe aging is not the problem. Disconnection is the problem. Disuse is the problem. Emptiness is the problem. And once you understand how these forces work, you'll hold the keys to protect yourself and those you love from silently slipping away before your time. So if you are over 60, or if you have parents, grandparents, or loved ones who are entering these years, I urge you, stay with me until the very end. What you learn today could add not just years to your life, but life to your years. Before we dive in, please support this channel by subscribing. Your support gives me the motivation to continue sharing the lessons I've learned after decades of walking beside people through both life and death. And if you find value in this, your subscription may help someone else one day avoid the fate I've seen too many suffer. Now, before we continue, let me ask you a question to reflect on. After 80, what do you believe is the greatest hidden threat to longevity? A. The slow fading of daily purpose. B. Sudden health events like heart attacks or strokes. Type your answer, A or B, in the comments below. I read every single response, and your answers help this community grow and learn together. Now let's begin. As a doctor who's spent a lifetime watching people grow old, I've learned to recognize the changes most others miss. It's not the major medical events that worry me the most. It's not the strokes, the cancers, or even the heart failures. Those we expect, we know how to treat them. What haunts me are the smaller changes, so quiet, so seemingly harmless, that they slip under everyone's radar, even under the radar family members who visit every week. One of the most destructive of these silent changes begins with something so simple, so ordinary, that most people don't even register it as a loss. It's the gradual disappearance of what I call everyday human touch. Not physical touch necessarily, though that plays a role, but those tiny, passing moments of human interaction that used to fill the background of your life without you even thinking about them. When we talk about human connection, people usually think of their closest relationships: spouses, children, grandchildren, best friends. Of course, those matter deeply. But I'm talking about something different, something far more fragile. The hundreds of tiny micro-interactions that used to stitch your days together like a quiet rhythm of life. I'm talking about nodding to your neighbor when you both bring out the trash cans in the morning. About exchanging a few casual words with the cashier at the local grocery store. About the friendly mailman who used to hand-deliver your packages and make small talk about the weather. About the elderly gentleman you passed every morning on your daily walk, exchanging nothing more than a simple good morning. These are microsocial engagements, and they carry far more weight than most people realize. You see, these small interactions serve as constant, quiet signals to your brain and body. You are still part of this world. You are still seen. You are still needed. And when you stop receiving those signals, something begins to shift deep inside your nervous system. The world grows quieter. Your sense of belonging begins to fray, often without you even noticing. Your brain, once accustomed to small doses of stimulation and social engagement, starts to slow. Hormones shift. Mood dips. And the cruel irony is that all of this happens while everything on the surface still seems perfectly fine. I remember one patient vividly. Her name was Margaret, 83 years old. She lived alone but was fiercely independent. She told me proudly how she no longer bothered with the supermarket, having her groceries delivered instead. She paid her bills online. She ordered everything she needed with just a few clicks. She rarely needed to leave her house anymore. "It's so convenient, doctor," she told me. "I don't bother anyone. Everything I need comes right to my door." At first glance, this sounded wonderful modern convenience, allowing her to remain independent in her later years. But what Margaret didn't see, and what most people fail to recognize, is that she wasn't just avoiding errands. She was slowly unplugging herself from life. When I asked about her days, they had grown painfully quiet. The delivery drivers left packages at her door without knocking. She rarely saw the neighbors anymore. The cashier she once chatted with every Tuesday was no longer part of her weekly routine. Even her short walks had become rare, as she worried about her balance. And though she hadn't noticed it herself, her voice carried a hollow tone, a certain emptiness that hadn't been there years earlier. Her story is not unique. I've seen it repeated in city after city, town after town. The modern world, in all its efficiency, offers ways for older adults to avoid almost all forms of casual human contact. We tell ourselves this is progress. We call it convenience. But what it really does is isolate us in ways that are dangerous to both mind and body. Our brains are social organs. They require constant input, even from strangers. Every nod, every smile, every brief conversation keeps critical neural circuits alive. These micro-interactions stimulate regions involved in memory, attention, emotional regulation, even immune function. And when these tiny social nutrients disappear, the decline isn't immediate, but it is inevitable. There's another hidden danger here. As these micro-interactions vanish, the very motivation to seek them out weakens. You become used to the silence. You start to believe you don't need them. And so you withdraw even further, thinking you're simply enjoying peace and quiet, not realizing you're slipping quietly into a kind of social malnutrition. I've seen men like Edward, 85 years old, who maintain sharpness simply because they preserve these micro-rituals. Every morning, Edward walked 2 blocks to his local diner in Springfield. He ordered the same coffee from the same waitress, exchanged pleasantries with the same elderly couple who sat at the corner booth, and waved to the school kids passing by. That 5-minute routine was not meaningless. It was medicine. It was oxygen for his nervous system. It signaled to his brain, you still belong here, life is still happening, and you are still part of it. What's tragic is that many families, unknowingly, contribute to the problem. Out of love, they offer to run errands for their aging parents. They bring the groceries, handle the banking, manage the appointments, all in the name of kindness. And while their intentions are pure, what they don't see is that they are slowly removing their loved ones from the very interactions that keep them connected to life itself. I often tell family members, don't take away the little things, let them walk to the mailbox. Let them chat with the pharmacist. Encourage them to visit the coffee shop. These are not chores, these are lifelines. Loneliness does not always feel like loneliness. Sometimes it feels like peace. Sometimes it feels like simplicity, but the brain knows the difference. And over time, the quiet erosion of microsocial engagement accelerates cognitive decline, increases inflammation, weakens the immune system, and hastens frailty in ways even the best medicine cannot reverse. If you want to protect yourself or your loved ones from this slow, invisible fading, the answer isn't grand interventions or expensive treatments. It's far simpler. Stay engaged with life at its smallest levels. Maintain your routines, greet the people you pass, exchange those tiny words. Make eye contact, nod, smile, because every one of those moments carries a message far more powerful than any pill. I am still here. I am still part of this world. As a doctor who has watched this pattern unfold far too often, I urge you fight for these small connections. They are far more important than we ever understood. They may be the very threads that hold you to life itself. Now, let me ask you something important to reflect on. In your opinion, which kind of connection plays the more critical role in keeping people mentally sharp after 80? A. Deep relationships with family and close friends. B. Small daily interactions with acquaintances and strangers. Type your answer A or B in the comments below. I read every response, and your thoughts help this community learn together. I have lost count of how many times I've seen this happen. A patient in their late 70s or early 80s comes into my office, looking remarkably well. They're still independent, sharp-minded, able to walk on their own. They may have a few aches and pains, but nothing out of the ordinary for their age. And then, something small happens, a slip on the stairs, a stumble on a sidewalk, a moment where their balance fails them for just a second. They don't break any bones. They aren't hospitalized, but everything changes. As a doctor who has walked with people through the long years of aging, I can tell you that these small incidents often mark the beginning of a far more dangerous decline. Not because of the injury itself, but because of what happens afterward. Fear steps in. Caution, once healthy and reasonable, begins to grow into something far more insidious. Overcaution. The logic seems innocent at first. You slipped on the steps, so you decide to avoid the stairs entirely. You nearly tripped while walking in the park, so you stop going for walks altogether. You feel a little unsteady bending down to tie your shoes, so you begin asking others for help. It's all so subtle, so well-intentioned, and yet so deeply damaging. The body, you see, does not operate like a fragile porcelain vase that needs to be kept safe on a shelf. It is a dynamic system, built to adapt, designed to respond to challenge. And when challenge is removed, when movement becomes restricted out of fear, the body quickly forgets how to function. I recall one man in particular. His name was Walter, 82 years old, living in Seattle. Walter had always been an active man. Every evening, rain or shine, he would walk a mile around his neighborhood. His doctor had praised him for years, and his heart, lungs, and muscles reflected the benefits of this simple habit. But one evening, as he was walking after a light rain, Walter's foot slipped on a patch of wet leaves. He caught himself before falling. No injury, no harm done, but it shook his confidence. The very next day, he told his daughter he was thinking of staying in for a few days, just to be safe. Those few days became a week, then a month. The walk stopped entirely. Walter began spending more evenings in his recliner, watching television instead of moving. Within 6 months, he had lost over 10 pounds of muscle. His legs felt weaker. He found himself struggling to rise from chairs that once posed no challenge. His balance deteriorated. And soon, even standing for extended periods felt exhausting. What happened to Walter was not the result of aging alone. It was the direct consequence of inactivity, the gradual surrender to fear. Most people assume that strength simply fades with age, but that is not entirely true. The muscles, the joints, even the brain's control of balance and coordination require constant reinforcement through movement. When you stop using these systems, they begin to shut down. Muscles atrophy. Joints stiffen. The brain's ability to regulate balance diminishes. The inner ear, the core stabilizers of your trunk, the neural pathways that coordinate motion all begin to degrade when they are not consistently challenged. What makes this decline so dangerous is that it happens silently. There's no alarm bell, no warning sign, no immediate pain. The first signs are often small. You start holding onto handrails more often. You hesitate before stepping off a curb. You feel unsteady when reaching for items on a high shelf. And as these moments accumulate, your world shrinks. The distance you're willing to walk shortens. The number of outings you're comfortable taking decreases. Eventually, the house itself feels like the only safe place left. As a doctor, I understand the natural instinct to avoid risk. No one wants to fall. The consequences of a fall in the elderly can be catastrophic: a broken hip, a long hospital stay, a loss of independence. But what many fail to realize is that avoiding movement out of fear creates its own form of slow, creeping destruction. In many cases, it is even more lethal than the fall itself. The tragedy is that the longer you avoid movement, the more fragile you become. And the more fragile you become, the more you feel justified in your avoidance. It is a vicious cycle, a downward spiral that I have seen claim far too many lives long before their time. This is why I counsel my patients to distinguish between smart caution and destructive overcaution. Smart caution means using assistive devices when necessary: handrails, walkers, canes. It means clearing clutter from walkways, wearing proper footwear, ensuring adequate lighting. It means being mindful of your environment. But destructive overcaution means surrendering entirely to immobility, allowing fear to dictate your every movement or lack thereof. The body craves motion. Even slow, deliberate motion can preserve strength, flexibility, and balance. Standing up from a chair without using your hands. Walking small distances daily. Gently stretching your limbs. Engaging your core muscles, which are often the first to weaken when movement slows. These simple acts send a powerful message to your entire system. I am still needed. I tell my patients, and I will tell you now, the human body has an extraordinary capacity to adapt, even well into the 80s and beyond. But it needs a reason. It needs regular reminders through motion, no matter how small or simple. The longer you avoid these reminders, the harder it becomes to reclaim them. One of the saddest phrases I hear from patients is, "I don't want to push myself," and I gently remind them, movement isn't pushing, it's living. To stop moving is to surrender, not to safety but to slow decay. Walter, thankfully, eventually recognized this truth. With the encouragement of his daughter and some gentle physical therapy, he began walking again, at first only to the mailbox, then around the block, and eventually back to his full mile. His strength returned. His balance improved. His confidence grew. But it required a deliberate choice to break free from the trap of overcaution. If there is one message I wish every person over 80 could hear, it is this: do not stop moving. Move carefully, move mindfully, but move. Your body remembers what you give it the chance to practice, and it is far more resilient than you may believe. Now I'd like you to reflect on this and share your thoughts with me. In your opinion, what is more dangerous for people over 80? A minor fall that might happen while staying active. B, the gradual weakening that comes from avoiding movement altogether. Type your answer A or B in the comments below. I read every response, and together we are building a community of learning, encouragement, and hope. As a doctor who has spent decades studying the aging body, I've come to realize that one of the cruelest aspects of aging happens almost entirely out of sight. It's not something you can see in a blood test. It's not something most people even feel, at least not at first. But inside every one of us, there is a master clock, and as we grow older, that clock begins to falter in ways that quietly dismantle our health. This clock I speak of is not on your wall or on your wrist. It's buried deep within your brain, your circadian rhythm. It is the silent conductor of nearly every function in your body. It tells your cells when to work, Your hormones when to rise and fall, your immune system when to repair, your mind when to rest. And when this internal clock falls out of sync, the consequences ripple through your entire being like slow-moving poison. In my younger years of practicing medicine, I underestimated the importance of this clock. I believed, as many physicians did, that nutrition, exercise, and genetics were the primary keys to aging well. But experience is a brutal teacher. And after decades of sitting at the bedside of patients who deteriorated before my eyes, I began to notice a pattern. Many of these individuals had not been struck by illness or accident, but by something quieter. Their bodies had lost their rhythm. I remember one of my patients vividly. Her name was Helen, an 84-year-old widow who had recently moved to Tucson, Arizona, to be closer to her son. She was intelligent, cheerful, and deeply independent. But within her first year of relocating, something shifted. She began sleeping longer during the day, often dozing off in her recliner with the afternoon sun pouring through the window. At night, she would stay up later than usual, watching television with bright lamps illuminating her small apartment well into the early hours. At first, these habits seemed harmless, even comforting. But then came the small complaints: difficulty falling asleep, grogginess in the mornings, difficulty concentrating, short-term memory lapses, and an unsettling fatigue that no amount of rest could seem to cure. Her blood work was normal, her medications hadn't changed. There was no obvious medical cause. But I saw it clearly. Helen's internal clock was slipping, and with it, her entire system was beginning to unravel. You see, the body's circadian rhythm relies on light to function properly. Sunlight in the morning is like a powerful switch that tells your brain, it's time to wake up, to move, to engage. This natural light exposure triggers the release of cortisol, energizing you for the day ahead. And as evening falls, darkness signals your brain to release melatonin, preparing your body for restorative, deep sleep. But when that natural cycle is disrupted, when we don't receive enough light during the day, or when we expose ourselves to artificial light late into the night, the clock begins to lose its calibration. The brain gets confused. Sleep becomes fragmented. Energy levels swing unpredictably. Mood grows unstable. The immune system weakens. And cognitive decline begins to accelerate. This is not theory. This is observable, measurable reality. I've seen it happen in patient after patient. And yet, light and sleep are only part of the equation. There is another burden that weighs just as heavily on those over 80, one that we, as a society, almost never address: the weight of unspoken grief. By the time most people reach their 80s, they have endured more loss than many younger people can comprehend. The loss of spouses, siblings, lifelong friends, sometimes even their own children. And while the world around them may offer polite condolences, few truly understand the depth and accumulation of that sorrow. In many cases, my patients would sit across from me and say, "I'm doing fine, doctor. I've made peace with it." But I could see it in their eyes, in their slumped shoulders, in the shallow rise and fall of their breath. The unspoken grief still lived within them. Our culture praises stoicism in old age. We admire those who endure heartbreak with quiet dignity. But what we often fail to recognize is that emotional suppression is not healing. It is simply delayed suffering. The human heart is not designed to store unlimited sorrow without release. When grief is swallowed, never spoken, never shared, never allowed to breathe, it becomes embedded in the body itself. Over time, this emotional weight manifests physically. Sleep disturbances, digestive problems, immune dysfunction, hormonal imbalances, chronic tension that tightens muscles and slows breath. The person may appear calm on the surface, but inside, they are carrying an invisible burden that taxes every system within them. I remember another patient well. George, 86 years old, from Buffalo, New York. He had lost his wife of 60 years. When I asked how he was coping, he simply smiled and said, "I don't dwell on it, doctor. Life goes on." And yet, within a year, George had lost significant weight, withdrew from his social groups, and struggled with sleep for the first time in his life. It was not a disease that had taken hold of him. It was unprocessed grief. What many fail to grasp is that grief, if not expressed, becomes biologically active. The nervous system responds to it as chronic stress. Inflammatory markers rise, hormones fluctuate. Neural circuits involved in emotional regulation become overworked. And over time, this silent suffering leads to real, measurable physical decline. This is why, as I grew older in my practice, I began encouraging my patients to find outlets for their sorrow. It didn't matter what form it took: speaking with a trusted friend, attending a grief support group, writing letters to those they had lost, speaking to a counselor or spiritual advisor. What mattered was that the grief be given permission to exist, to breathe, to move, because what is spoken can be processed. What is buried will ferment. In my experience, those who live long, vibrant lives into their 90s and beyond almost always have one thing in common. They do not carry their grief alone. They find ways to release it, gently but consistently, allowing space for joy and sorrow to coexist. If you or your loved ones wish to remain alive, not only in body but in spirit after 80, you must guard both your internal clock and your emotional heart. Seek the morning light, honor the darkness at night. And when sorrow visits, as it inevitably will, do not lock it away. Give it air. Give it words. Give it space to move through you, not stay trapped within you. Now, I would like you to pause and reflect with me. Which silent force do you believe causes more harm to people after 80? A disrupted sleep and circadian rhythm from poor light exposure. B. The slow, hidden buildup of unspoken grief and emotional suppression. Type your answer, A or B, in the comments below. I read every response, and together we are building a community of learning and healing. After so many years of practicing medicine, watching people age up close, I've come to believe that there is one element of longevity that stands above all others. More than diet, more than genetics, more than any medication I have ever prescribed. It is not something you can measure easily with a blood test or detect on a scan. But its absence is often the single most common thread I see in those who begin to decline after the age of 80. That element is purpose. Purpose is the great quiet force that holds life together. I'm not speaking of some grand philosophical life purpose. I'm not talking about finding the meaning of the universe or writing your memoirs. No. For the patients I've cared for, purpose has almost always been much simpler, smaller, and yet infinitely more powerful. It is the reason to rise in the morning, the tiny obligations that give structure to the hours. The ordinary rituals that remind you and your body that you are still needed, still contributing, still tethered to the living world around you. In my early years as a young doctor, I naively believed that health after 80 was mostly a matter of physical maintenance, the right medications, the right physical therapy, the right precautions, and yes, those things do matter. But as the decades passed, I began to notice something no textbook ever taught me. The people who lived vibrant, engaged lives into extreme old age were those who woke up every morning with some small task to do. It wasn't their blood pressure or cholesterol that set them apart. It was the quiet rhythm of daily purpose. I recall a patient named Ruth, 88 years old, living alone in Charleston, South Carolina. Ruth was not wealthy. She was not in perfect health. She had arthritis in her hands and walked slowly with a cane. But there was a spark in her eyes that many of my younger patients lacked. Every Monday, Ruth sat at her kitchen table and wrote postcards to fellow church members who were homebound or in the hospital. Every Thursday, she cooked a large pot of soup, portioned it into containers, and delivered it to a local shelter, often with the help of her neighbor. And every afternoon around 4 o'clock, she sat by her window and watched the neighborhood children walking home from school. She knew many of them by name and waved as they passed. These small rituals weren't grand. They weren't the kind of accomplishments that make headlines. But they gave shape to her days, and more importantly, they gave her body and mind a reason to stay engaged. Ruth's mind remained sharp. Her mood was steady. Her health, while not perfect, remained remarkably stable year after year. What most people fail to realize is that purpose is not just a psychological luxury. It is biological necessity. The body listens to the mind. When the mind sees no reason to engage, the body begins to shut down. Appetite diminishes. Sleep becomes fragmented. Muscles weaken. The immune system grows sluggish. Memory falters. All because the brain is receiving fewer and fewer signals that say, "You are still needed." The elderly patients I've watched fade the fastest are not those struck by sudden illness, but those who slowly lose the texture of their days. Their weekly card games get canceled. The church groups stop meeting. Their grandchildren grow older and visit less often. The house grows quieter. One day blends into the next, indistinguishable except for the slow creep of emptiness. At first these changes seem small. A skipped meeting here, a cancelled visit there. But in time, the entire framework of daily purpose begins to erode. And when it does, something far deeper begins to dissolve: the will to remain fully alive. I've seen this pattern too many times to dismiss it as coincidence. In my years of practice, I've had patients with serious medical conditions who nevertheless lived with remarkable vitality because they still felt useful. And I've had patients who were physically healthier on paper but slipped into rapid decline once their days lost shape and meaning. Purpose fuels the release of neurotransmitters that regulate mood and cognition. It keeps the brain active, the immune system vigilant, the body engaged. And perhaps most importantly, it gives people a reason to push through the discomforts of aging, to keep moving, to stay social, to care for themselves. As I often tell my patients, the body is far more willing to fight for survival when it believes it is still contributing to something. The opposite is also true. When a person feels they no longer matter, the systems that once kept them vibrant begin to power down, almost as if the body no longer sees the point in maintaining itself. This is why, when I counsel families of the elderly, I urge them not just to focus on safety and comfort, but on purpose. Let their loved ones continue to water the plants, even if it takes them longer. Encourage them to write letters, to make phone calls, to tend to their small hobbies. Support them in volunteering, mentoring, or simply observing the world around them in ways that feel meaningful. The scale of the purpose does not matter. What matters is its consistency. A simple ritual, repeated daily or weekly, can become the anchor that holds a person steady against the inevitable waves of aging. In the end, I have come to believe that thriving after 80 is less about preserving the body, and more about preserving the will to live. And that will is fueled not by fear, not by avoidance, but by purpose. If you or someone you love is entering these later years, I urge you, do not underestimate the power of even the smallest purpose. It may very well be the difference between simply surviving and truly living. Now, I would like to ask you a question to reflect on. Which do you believe has a stronger influence on longevity after 80? A. Medical treatments and physical health management. B. Having consistent daily purpose, no matter how small. Type your answer, A or B, in the comments below. I read every response, and together we continue to learn how to build not just longer lives, but fuller ones. After spending my entire professional life walking beside people through the long journey of aging, I have learned that growing old is rarely the sudden cliff that people fear. Instead, it is more like a slow, winding path, and at every bend, there are choices. Some are so small, so quiet, that most people don't even recognize them as choices at all. Yet over time, these invisible decisions accumulate, shaping whether one remains vibrant, engaged, and alive after 80, or quietly fades long before life truly ends. We often assume that what happens after 80 is mostly determined by genetics or fate, that our bodies simply break down like worn-out machines. But the truth I've witnessed is far more hopeful and far more sobering. Much of the decline I've seen is not the result of unavoidable biological aging, but of habits, mindsets, and subtle shifts that slowly rob people of their vitality. It begins with small things: no longer chatting with the mailman, ordering groceries online instead of visiting the store, letting the grandchildren visit less often, turning to television late at night instead of stepping outside to greet the morning sun. Over time, these choices dismantle the very systems that kept us strong for decades. We lose the microsocial engagement that stimulates our brains, regulates our emotions, and reminds us that we still belong in the world. We become overly cautious, allowing fear of falling to shrink our world, leading to muscle loss, balance issues, and physical frailty. We disrupt our internal clock, failing to honor the natural rhythm of light and dark, slowly compromising sleep, immunity, and cognition. We suppress grief, carrying unspoken sorrow that silently weakens our nervous system, digestion, and hormones. And perhaps most tragic of all, we lose daily purpose, those small, steady routines that give us a reason to wake up, to move, to continue investing in life. But here's the beautiful truth: because this decline is slow, it can also be reversed, slowly, gently, intentionally. It does not require expensive treatments or complex interventions. Instead, it requires awareness, courage, and small acts of engagement that rebuild the habits of living. Start with simple steps. Walk to the mailbox. Sit by the window each morning and soak in the sunlight. Greet your neighbor as they walk by. Share your grief with a trusted friend or counselor. Write a note to someone you care about. Volunteer, even in small ways. Feed the birds. Tend a plant. Join a group. Maintain a ritual that gives your day shape. Every small act tells your body and mind the same powerful message. I am still here. I am still needed. My life still matters. The human body responds to these messages. Muscles regain strength. Sleep improves. Immunity strengthens. Mood stabilizes. Cognitive function sharpens. And perhaps most importantly, the will to live remains vibrant. In my years as a physician, I've seen too many people give up far too early, not because their bodies failed them, but because they believed life no longer required them. Please don't fall into that trap. You have more power than you think, not to stop aging, but to change the way you age. If you're listening to me now, regardless of your age, I want you to pause for a moment and reflect. What small action can you take starting today to stay engaged with life? What one habit can you rebuild, not out of necessity, but out of desire to keep your heart, your mind, and your body alive? Let me ask you a simple question. Which one do you believe is more powerful for healthy aging? A. Small daily habits that keep you connected to life. B. Medical treatment and medication alone. Please share your answer, A or B, down in the comments below. I read every comment, and your thoughts not only encourage me, but also help others who may be facing the same crossroads in life. If you found this video helpful and meaningful, I kindly invite you to subscribe to the channel. Your support gives me the motivation to continue sharing these lessons, not for myself, but for all those who can still benefit from this knowledge. And if you feel moved to donate, even a small contribution helps keep this channel alive, allowing me, an old doctor, to keep doing what I believe in. Sharing wisdom, giving hope, and helping people live with dignity, strength, and peace as they grow older. Thank you for being here, and thank you for choosing to invest in your own life.